You're listening to the Murphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning into the Murphology Podcast. I'm your host, Kathy, aka Murph, and I am here to give tips and information about group bicycling and bicycle touring with a focus on the Midwest and hopefully provide some entertainment for you as well. Well, I'm sitting here with Dave Wedemeyer. Hey, Dave.
Hi, Murph.
How are you?
Fine.
Good. So Dave is called Dave, but I only know him as Hacky Jedi. And if we've got a few loyal listeners that listen to Just Go Bike, I interviewed him, was that last year?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. Okay. So there's another great interview out there of you, so people could go tune into it. But really quickly, Hacky Jedi, I met you. Well, I started RAGBRAI in 1997, and I may have met you on my first RAGBRAI. I don't recall, but I was with a bicycle team called Team Stiff, and you were like this dude who never had your shirt on, and you had the name Hacky Jedi on your back. I think it was in Sharpie, black Sharpie, right?
Yeah.
So then the next day you would see you, and you'd have like tan lines from the Hacky Jedi from the day before. I believe you have the name because you are, or you were, or you still are, a superstar at the Hacky Sack.
True.
So the guys on our team, you know, felt like they could, you know, stand up to your skills. So I think you guys all started interacting and playing Hacky Sack, and the rest is history. You're now on the team.
Yep.
Is that true about Hacky Jedi?
Yeah. It's how I got to know like the guys from Sigourney who started Team Stiff.
Yeah.
Is through playing Hacky Sack with them.
Awesome. And do you still play? Like, are you in your living room sometime just practicing away?
That has been known to happen, yeah. And I did play yesterday, actually.
Really?
With a few friends.
Yeah. Which you were at, we're recording this in the end of October. So you were at Iowa State homecoming because you are an Iowa State alumni.
Yeah, and we tailgated and played some Hacky Sack for old time's sake.
Cool. And I hate to say this, but I'm just going to say it. Go Hawks.
You can say that if you want. And I'll just say, go Cyclones.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Well, with that said, let's get started. The topic today is going to be century rides, which I'm sure everybody knows what a century ride is. But if you don't, it is riding your bike 100 miles in the same day.
Yes.
Century 100.
Yes.
So there's that. Well, let's start out by, is it okay if I call you Hacky now?
Sure.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good. Where do you live, and what's the cycling culture like there?
I live in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
Cycling culture is very good. They have a lot of different groups. A lot of the bike shops will have a different ride every night.
Oh, wow.
Or at least, 1 week day each night and each week. And so if you want to do a ride with a group of people, you could do one every night of the week with different bike shops.
And is it mostly road cycling, or is there also a culture of mountain biking or trail riding or bike packing?
Yeah, I'd say mostly road riding, but there are some good mountain biking places, especially out west of St. Louis in the Wildwood area. There's a ski resort out there. It's pretty hilly.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of people go mountain biking out there. And then not too far away is Pere Marquette State Park, which is in Illinois, but not very far from like St. Charles.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's some good mountain biking there. There's a Castlewood Park where a lot of people go mountain biking there. So, yeah, there's plenty of places to do that.
Awesome. Well, when you're training, because we're going to get into this, but you do an awful lot of century rides, so you can't just not train for that sort of event. Maybe you can.
No, I would recommend training.
Yeah. 100 miles is a long time to be in the saddle. But do you do most of your training miles on roads or trails or indoor trainer?
I would say almost all on road.
Okay.
Yeah. And
okay.
There's an organization down in St. Louis called TrailNet, and a lot of times maybe not every weekend, but every other weekend on Sunday mornings or Saturday mornings, they will have a TrailNet ride somewhere either in like suburban St. Louis or over in Illinois or wherever. And so those can be anywhere from 40 to 60 miles.
Oh, that's nice.
And, right. And then I'll go and they're group rides, and I'll go do those. That'll help keep me in shape.
Yeah. It's nice to do I talk about group rides all the time on this podcast, but it's nice because you can kind of gauge your skill set. Usually in group rides, there's always somebody faster than you and always somebody slower. So you can, either strive to be up towards the front or be content with where you're at. So,
Right.
Right. Yeah. Well, when we talk about century rides, I bet you I've done probably less than 5, I think. Maybe if you include RAGBRAI, if I've done those century rides. But anyway, not very many. So how did you get into feeling the need to do them every year?
Boy, that's a tough call.
Yeah.
It just started little and just kept growing and growing. And it's just, I don't know, for some reason I like doing them. I like the feeling of accomplishment when you cross the finish line.
Yeah.
And you see, it's great being outside for that long amount of time. A lot of times it's just great scenery.
Yeah.
Just like being outside. And it did start as a small, just doing it, 2 a year or something like that.
Right.
And then, I don't know, at some point, I remember one time I was at work, it was a slow day, and I printed out a map of the United States, and I got a highlighter out of my desk. I started coloring in the states
Yep.
where I had done century rides, and I tacked that up in my cubicle, and that made me want to just start doing more and more until some years I've done 10 in a year.
Wow. So. And to look at that map and be like, oh, I've never done one in this state, and then get on the old Google machine, and I'm sure that you find several century rides, and then it's probably a matter of, scenery, dates that it's available.
Right.
I'm sure there's all kinds of things that go into play. Well, we kind of touched on it, but what is it that you enjoy about riding 100 miles in one day? Like, is it just literally like, I can do this?
Well, sometimes it is a challenge because there are some really tough century rides out there to do, especially in the mountainous states. Mm-hmm. And so I like trying to, do the toughest ones just to get that on my bucket or check that off my bucket list. Because some of the rides are just so well known and so many people have done them, and then you want to do them too. And so I've gone off and traveled around the country to go do them.
Awesome. Well, I can tell you my limited experience, I kind of crack myself up because, okay, you get your mind around, I'm going to do 100 miles today. It's usually the crack of dawn, and I'm not a really good morning person. So I'm already kind of setting myself up like, oh, I'm up. All right, let's do this. The first 25 miles go by, and you're just like, oh my God, it's like not even 8 o'clock, and I'm already 1/4 of the way done. This is awesome. And you have a sandwich or something. And then the next 25 miles, I'm like, oh, this isn't so bad. Yes, this is great. And then that third section, I'm like, crying like, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do it. And then you kind of get, at least for me, you kind of get your second one like, all right, Murph, you're at 75 miles. There's no way that you're not going to finish this. So I don't know if you go through similar emotions.
Oh, well, I don't know about emotions.
Yeah.
But I would say the last 20 to 25 miles is really can start wearing you down mentally.
Yeah.
And just wondering when it's going to get done.
Right. Well, how many century rides have you done to date?
To date, I've done 128.
Wow.
Yeah, in my lifetime.
Wow. And on a side note, before we started recording, I showed Hacky a little, I got my my calculator out, and was like, okay, let's just say each of these rides, what'd I say? $75 entry fee. That may be way off. But if you've done 128 century rides and paid those registration fees, you'd have $9,600 in your pocket if you didn't do all those century rides. So then we were dreaming about how great of a bicycle you could have bought with that.
Yeah, that'd be a really nice bicycle.
I know. But then, you probably would weigh 400 pounds because you didn't exercise and you wouldn't have any interest in cycling. So.
Yeah, I'm sure I just would have wasted that money on something else. So.
Exactly. You're right. Yeah. Okay, here's a fun question because I'll tell a story about this, but the question is, what do you do with all those medals that you earn?
Yeah, I really don't have that many. I think I have a dozen medals.
Yeah.
Century rides don't do medals, although it's become more popular lately.
Right.
I think. Usually century rides will have patches or some other souvenir, but
okay, yeah.
With the medals I do have, I have a coat rack. And they're just hanging from the coat rack.
Yep.
And so when people walk in, it's because it's right by the front door.
Right.
And so when people walk in, they see them. And it's a good conversation starter.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my funny story is, I think it was RAGBRAI, back when I used to ride the bus out with the team to the start of RAGBRAI. And for those of you who have never done RAGBRAI, I'm sorry I bring it up every episode, but it's such a great adventure. But we're talking 5, 6, 7 hours that we are on a bus driving out to the start of Ragbri. So it's a long day, lots of drinking. Anyway, so Hacky shows up one morning wearing, I think you were wearing 3 medals, and you didn't acknowledge that you had them on. So then people would be like, what's up with that? You're like, oh, gosh.
I forgot I still had these on. Right.
I forgot I was wearing these old things. I mean, these are heavy, clanking metal. God, it was so funny.
I do that gag once in a while.
Yeah.
I'll wear it to work, and like someone will say, well, what's that? And I'll look down like, what's what? And I'm like, oh, jeez, I forgot I still had this on. But it's funny you should mention the whatever century, because I just did that right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, do you remember when and where your first century was?
Well, oddly enough, it was in Rhode Island, and it was called the flattest century in the East.
Oh.
And I knew 2 guys from Ragbri who were from Connecticut, and I had to go to Long Island for my job. This is back in '97, and I emailed one of these guys, and I said, hey, I'm going to be on Long Island for 2 weeks. Let's get together in the city and have dinner or drinks or whatever. And he replied, said, I have a better idea. We're doing a century ride this weekend. Why don't you come early, bring your bike, and join us? And so I changed my flight reservation and packed up my bike and flew into Rhode Island, I think it was. And I met them the next morning, and we did that ride. And that was my first century back in '97.
And then you were hooked.
I don't know if I was hooked yet then, but yeah, it was a good time. It was a really nice ride, and and then it just started from there.
Let's talk about some of the century rides that you've done. How about the toughest century ride? Would you describe?
Ooh, the toughest that I've done, I think, was the triple bypass in Colorado.
Oh.
And that's like around 120 miles.
But
and a lot of climbing. It was like 12,000 feet or 11,000 feet of climbing. I can't remember for sure, but it was really hilly.
And I'm assuming triple bypass means you go over 3 mountain passes?
Yeah, 3 mountain passes.
Wow.
Yeah. And I actually tried the first time I tried it, they had the worst weather they ever had for the ride. It was almost snowing, like wet flakes, when we got to the top of the first pass. And they had to rest up there. And then people were just turning around and going
like
back to
bailing,
their car. Yeah. And I'd driven all the way to Denver. I'm like, am I going to bail on this? And I did, and I'm glad I did, because it rained all day and all night long. And then years later, I went back and did it again and actually completed it.
Awesome. A coworker of mine, I think, has done the triple bypass. Is there an option to do it backwards, if I remember right?
Well, yeah, it's so that you can go one direction.
Yeah.
On Saturday, and then go back and do it the opposite direction on Sunday.
Man.
So yeah, that's tough.
That sounds, pretty crazy. Wow. How about one of the most scenic centuries?
Oh, there's a few there. I would say America's Most Beautiful Ride at Lake Tahoe. That was a great ride. I even saw a bear on the side of the road. Like 10 miles into the ride, there was a bear.
Was it Smokey the Bear? Was he had his hat on saying, don't put your cigarette out?
And I was just so in awe. I couldn't even say anything. There's some bikers behind me, and all I could do was point at the bear. And then it scared him off, and he went back in the woods.
Oh, my gosh. And what was that ride called? America's
Most Beautiful Ride.
Okay.
At
so
Lake Tahoe.
They know that it's a scenic route.
Yeah. And then, Taz Rav West, which is tour of Swan River Valley. It's in Montana.
Okay.
And it's a 2-day ride, so you get 2 centuries in on that weekend. And that was beautiful. And I saw moose. We were barely out of Missoula, and like 6 miles into the ride, and then there was a moose on the side of the road. So that was cool.
Wow. And I've only seen one on TV, but they're huge, aren't they?
Yeah, this one wasn't all that big. It was a young female, but still, it was cool seeing them.
Yeah.
And that was just lakes and rivers, and it was just a great ride.
Right. Cool. So, when I think of century rides, you're doing it as your own person, like you're responsible for getting yourself from the beginning to the end. But it's definitely a form of group riding, because you are paying money to ride the same route with a bunch of people. Yeah. So I'm going to assume that you talk to people throughout the day, probably make some friends, maybe see people on different centuries. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that has happened to me. One time I did this ride in Indiana called Amish Land and Lakes Ride, and it was a 2-day ride. And I remember talking to a couple on that ride, and then a few years later I did Tom Rov here in Iowa, tour of Mississippi River Valley, and that same couple was doing Tom Rov, and I saw them again.
Oh, wow.
And there was I did a ride in Delaware called the Shorefire Century, and at the end of that ride I was talking to a couple, and we found out we had done the same ride in Maine just a year earlier.
Oh, really?
Called the Lighthouse Century.
Huh.
And so, yeah, I'm not the only one out there doing multiple century rides all over the place.
Would you say there's such a thing as an easy century ride?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I can think of 3 off the top of my head. There was one in Louisiana. It was fairly flat. It was called the Crescent City Cyclist Century. And it was a little north of New Orleans. I did one in Mississippi called the Natchez Trace Century, and it was very flat. And the one I did in Delaware that I just mentioned, the Shorefire Century, it was very flat. We had tailwinds all day. It was a perfectly beautiful day, and it was a very easy ride.
Wow. You mentioned that you've done, back-to-back centuries where you'll do it over a weekend, but have you ever done more than a century in one day?
Oh, yeah. The longest one, I guess, is Rain, right across Indiana. And that's a 1-day ride, and that's 160 miles.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, and that goes across the whole state.
How long did that take you? Like, was it dusk to dawn? I'm sorry, dawn to dusk?
Yeah, I think I started around 6 in the morning and probably finished. It may have been 6 p.m. It was still light out.
Yeah.
It may have been late. It may have been like 7 or something.
That's a long day.
Yeah, it is. But what helped, luckily we had some tailwinds that day. And when you do rides like that, you want to get in a draft line.
Sure.
Because then you're going faster and it's easier pedaling. And if you can get in a draft line, sure, you might have to pull it once in a while.
Sure.
But it really helps to try to just go from draft line to draft line between rest stops, and it helps you get across.
When you're doing all of these century rides, I'm going to guess that you have some good stories, like anything semi-embarrassing maybe or funny that you want to share?
Well, what first comes to my mind is I did a ride in North Carolina just this last July, and it was called the Hot Dog at 100. It was in Mars Hill, North Carolina, and it was a very tough ride, and I made it tougher by forgetting to bring my bike sandals.
Oh, no.
And so I had to ride in my tennis shoes.
Oh, no.
And I didn't have standard pedals. It was with my little clip-in pedals.
Yeah.
And I remember this guy who was helping to organize the ride, and he goes, "Are you sure?" He goes, "This is a very grueling ride." He goes, "Maybe you should just do the metric century route." And I was like, I did not drive all the way here from St. Louis just to do a metric century. So I rode the whole I started early.
Oh,
I got an hour before the mass start.
Yeah.
And took off, and I ended up being the last one to finish.
Oh, man.
And I was cramping up really bad, but I didn't walk up any hills like I saw some people do. And I finished it. And I was having foot cramps and leg cramps until like 3 a.m. that night. I couldn't get any sleep. But I think I've become a legend, I think, at that ride, because they will, for years, be talking about that crazy guy from St. Louis who rode the whole thing in tennis shoes. So.
Well, you say that, but this has happened to me before, where people think that I'm crazy, that I'm riding my bike in sandals. Yeah. And Shimano, there's other brands. Lake makes them. Nash Bar made a sandal, but they literally have clips on the bottom, so they fit into your pedals and they snap in. And I did a ride in Wisconsin, I believe, which, that's a nice Midwest. You just think people have those as well, but everyone was like, "Oh, are you afraid that you're going to get your toe caught in spoke because you're wearing a sandal?" I'm like, I don't think I've ever put my toe near my spoke. Like, right. With a shoe or a sandal, but you've mentioned the same thing, that when you get out of Iowa and RagBri country, that people don't know what sandals are.
Yeah, I get comments on it every time when I do a ride in some other state. I mean, even in Missouri, I mean, they've never seen or heard of them. So it's strange that they don't catch on. I don't know why they don't. And I just bought some new bike sandals yesterday.
Whoa, yesterday?
In Ames at Bike World, if I can plug them.
Yes, yeah.
And I don't even need any new ones, but I bought some just because I'm afraid Shimano will decide to stop manufacturing them.
Yeah, or they keep changing them and bigger, thicker leather, and
right.
I still would love to go back to the ones I had in the late 90s, the blue, real thin ones. I think a lot of us wore them until they were, I think my foot was sticking through the bottom of it because it like worn them out so thin. But you mentioned Missouri, that's where you live. And I have been on some bicycle tours with you, famously known as the Wine Ride, which starts in historic St. Charles. And I don't recall where we turn around.
We turned around at Augusta. We went as far as Augusta.
Okay.
And came back.
So we ran into some wineries, some breweries, and of course, the bar that we love so much, Defiance.
In Defiance.
In Defiance, Missouri. But so you've been known to pack up your bike and do overnight rides occasionally. Mm-hmm. Most of your time is probably just on your road bike, getting ready for a century. But give us your take on like the Katy Trail and what you like about it.
Yeah, the Katy Trail is just beautiful. And I think last year I rode from St. Louis all the way to Lee's Summit, which is a suburb of Kansas City.
Okay.
And so most of that was on the Katy Trail, and it's just a beautiful trail, a canopy of trees over the trail. In a lot of places, a lot of times you have the river on one side of the trail and the sandstone cliffs on the other side of the trail, and it's just beautiful. And plenty of places to like small towns to stop at along the way. Yep. And it's great. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. I've gone 3 or 4 times. I haven't gone the last couple years, but beautiful trail. And it, if I remember right, you can figure it out so that you would start at one area, end somewhere, and then take the Amtrak back. Is that true?
Yeah, there's some places where you can do that. Like, so I rode all the way, across the state, and I went to Lee's Summit because there was an Amtrak station there, and so I could just get on the train and come home.
Yeah.
I think Herman is another place you can ride to and get on the train. Sedalia is another town along the route. So there's places to do that.
And Amtrak is very bike friendly. Like you can take your bike ride on there.
Yeah, for like $10 fee is all they charge or something.
And I've not experienced the Amtrak where you're talking about, but do they have like a bar car on there? You can go.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that'd be fun. Finish your bike ride and then go have a frosty mug while somebody else gets you back to where you're going. Oh, that's cool. So think about on your bike, whether it's a century ride, you probably don't have much room for stuff, but do you pack any luxury items, like something you probably don't need, but you just pack it anyway?
Well, I travel very light.
Yeah.
I don't have the panniers on my side of my bike. I just have a small backpack.
Yeah.
And, it's for a 4-day ride, like a weekend on the Katy Trail across the state, whatever. Mm-hmm. I'd say the only luxury item I pack is my hacky sack.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you can't leave without that.
Right.
Yeah. And do you upgrade your hacky sack occasionally, or is it the same tried and true bag that you've always had?
I upgrade. I got plenty of hacky sacks at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say to somebody thinking about doing their first century ride? Like, would you say don't do it, or would you say get on your bike?
Yeah, go do it. For like I said earlier, don't do a century ride without having at least, I'd say, having done a metric century, 62 miles or something. At least do that much. And I'll go to the Y and ride the trainer bike if it's winter time to get ready. And one thing, like if you're doing a RAGBRAI, a multi-day ride, I always advise people go to the gym and do squats and lunges so that your legs are all stiff and sore and you're walking funny for the week or two before RAGBRAI. Because then when you wake up on, in the mornings on RAGBRAI, you're not feeling stiff and sore. That part's done and your legs are ready to just get on and ride and you're not hurting.
That's great advice. Yeah. You should probably do that all year round, but
well, yes. Yeah, I would recommend that too. But if you're crunched for time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Do you have any bike rides on your horizon, like in the next 6 months or year?
Oh, so many rides, so little time.
Yes,
right?
I know.
There's plenty I want to do. There's one out in California I'd like to do called the Cool Breeze Century. It's in Ventura, California, and it's close. And they have a patch.
Very good.
So that motivates me to do that one. And I've been looking at their website for years saying maybe next year.
Yeah.
And like this year I said, I'm tired of saying maybe next year. So so I went and did like the Crater Lake Century out in Oregon. I did the Sequoia Century out in like San Jose, California area. And I did the Civil War Century out in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania.
Ooh, that's probably pretty cool.
Yeah, it
Actually,
was.
all of these sound very cool, but
Yeah.
yeah. And did you do your century in Hawaii yet?
Yeah, I did that last year.
Last year,
I did the
okay.
Honolulu Century last
Yeah.
year, and that was beautiful.
Yeah.
And talk about scenic rides.
Yeah.
You had a lot of times mountains, beautiful mountains on one side of the road and the ocean on the other side
Oh
of the
my
road.
gosh.
And it was great.
And didn't that complete your quest to do a century in every state? Or are you
Well,
still...
that was my 49th. This year,
Oh.
I went back in July. I went to New Hampshire and I did the Mount Washington Century in New Hampshire, and that was my 50th state.
Oh, congratulations.
No, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So when we were preparing for this podcast, Hacky sent me a list of century rides, and I don't think it's a complete list of every ride you've done, right?
No, not a complete list.
But the cool thing is you categorized it with, here are the easiest century rides I've done. Here are the toughest century rides. Here are century rides with cool names. And it's so awesome. So I'm going to make a category. You can go to my website, which is just murphologypodcast.com. And we have to think of a clever name for it. Maybe it can be like Hacky's Corner, Hacky's Century Corner, or something like that.
We'll work on that. Yeah.
And you can look them up. And then, of course, if you're interested in doing them, you can get in your Google machine and find out when the next century ride is in that state. But it's pretty cool. I appreciate that you made that list, which I know that you're probably a guy that keeps pretty good stats on all your rides.
I do have a spreadsheet of all the century rides I've done anyway. And there are some websites out there for your listeners. It's called bikeacentury.com and grandfondo.something.com. And so there's websites out there that you can go and it'll show you century rides by state and province or whatever.
Or if you really want to know what Hacky's doing, you can go to murphologypodcast.com.
Yeah, right.
And go to Hacky Century Corner. So anyway, have you done any century rides outside of the United States?
I did one in Ontario.
Okay.
And that's the only one I've done. I think now that I've gotten all 50 states done, I already know of some century rides in like Quebec and Nova Scotia and Alberta, Prince Edward Island. I'd like to go up and do some of those provinces sometime.
And we should probably say this before we end, but you have mentioned patches a couple times. And I would say not only are you famous for being Hacky Jedi with your stellar hacky sack skills, you're also known for your, dare I say, obsession with patches?
I wouldn't say it's an obsession, but it's a good souvenir.
Yeah.
And once again, just like the medals, as people walk, and when I'm wearing my denim jacket with the patches, it's a good conversation starter.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. And you have so many patches, you're now putting them on the inside of your jacket, right?
Well, I actually have a second jacket.
Oh.
Because the first jacket was filled and there's no room, and so I bought a second denim jacket, and I'm slowly putting patches on that.
We should probably give a shout out to Team Stiff, which is how we met, you and I.
Yeah.
I spent, probably about 18 years on that team. You probably a few more than that.
Yeah, it has been by now.
But we host a bike ride in the Johnson County, Lynn County area of Iowa called the Stiff Ride, and you do patches for it each year.
Yeah.
And so you start your day with patches pinned all over your jersey, and maybe your shorts or your kilt too.
At least the jersey.
Yeah, and as the day goes on, you're pedaling away trying to sell those patches. But I love those patches, and people talk about them all the time. They have a nice theme. I think we're well into 10 years doing Stiff Ride, maybe longer.
More than that.
Yeah,
a lot more than that.
So that's pretty fun.
Yeah,
So
it's been 21 or something like that.
maybe you should make the Stiff Ride like a 100-mile option.
I joked around about having a century loop one year. That was totally a joke.
Yeah, and it's a very social ride, so it'd probably be like you and maybe one other person doing the loop. But
I remember, it's strange how those patches have become collector's items.
Yeah.
People come do that ride and immediately come up to me and say, I want a patch.
Yeah.
And then they've been collecting them for years.
And
And it's funny how I remember when I first joined Team Stiff and they were saying, Hacky, you should come up and do the Stiff Ride next year. And I said, well, I have a policy. I only do bike rides that have patches. And they were like, fine, Hacky, you're in charge of making a patch next year.
Yeah, make your own patch.
And so the next year I designed and ordered the patches, and it started, right there.
And it's stuck.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working. Yeah. Good. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a blast. I always love talking to you, and I can't say that I'm going to put a century ride on my calendar for 2020, but who knows? Maybe I will.
No, it was always a good time.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Hacky.
Thank you.
How about a touring tip? This week, thanks to Hacky Jedi, I'm going to give you a few century rides worth looking into. First off is one of the easiest century rides. This is the Natchez Trace Century Ride. Natchez spelled Natchez. It will be coming up Saturday, May 2nd, 2020, and registration opens in January. Located in Mississippi, this ride has about 700 riders each year. Highlights include a stretch on the National Scenic Byway. Also, this ride goes through Ross Barnett Reservoir, and of course, quite a few small towns worth spinning through. The Natchez Trace Century Ride starts and ends in Ridgeland, Mississippi, and you can find more information at ridgelandsportsandevents.com. How about one of the toughest century rides? Check out Assault on Mount Mitchell. This ride will be May 18th, 2020, and registration is now open. This is an A to B ride from Spartanburg, South Carolina to the summit at Mount Mitchell in North Carolina. Total vertical ascent is more than 10,000 feet. They're, quote, "you against the mountain." You can find out more information at theassaults.com. And finally, how about a very scenic century ride? America's Most Beautiful Ride will be June 7th, 2020, and registration opens in January. This is a clockwise route around Lake Tahoe, and you will be spinning through both Nevada and California. Now, stops include Emerald Bay, Spooner Junction, and a stop in Truckee, California. There is about 5,000 feet of vertical climb, and if you're not quite ready for a century ride, they also offer a shorter option. For a complete list of Hacky century rides, go to Murphologypodcast.com. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Check out Murphologypodcast.com to find all kinds of great info, and email me at murphologypodcast@gmail.com. I appreciate your time today, and thanks for tuning in to listen to the Murphology Podcast. I leave you with this quote from the unwritten book of Murphology. This quote comes from Heidi Dallaire. There comes a moment in time when you realize that no person, place, or guru has enough power or wisdom to save you. Only you can save you. Be your own guru. Think about it.